Ended up doing really well within that organization and learned a lot of skills as far as sales and management and all these other things. But the important piece was my mentor within the organization actually handed me a book called Who Moved My Cheese. And this book changed my life.
This is Girl Take Note, a podcast for women who are looking to turn their dreams into reality. Do you want to start your podcast, but you're worried about the costs? Well, I've got the perfect solution for you. I'm Shawnee Sanders. I'm from the Girl Take Note podcast, and I'm here today to tell you all about my podcast starter kit, only available on my Amazon storefront. This kit has everything you need to get started, from headphones to microphones to audio interfaces, all under $500. It is one of the most affordable kits to help you get started with your podcasting dreams today. So don't wait. Go ahead and grab yours now. Click the link in the description below and start shopping, and happy podcast. Hey, Justin, welcome to Girl Take Note podcast. How are you doing?
Shawnee, I am doing great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, this is going to be good. I'm so happy to have this conversation because, one, you are a top podcaster in this industry, and a lot of people want to know how to start a podcast, especially entrepreneurs. Is it beneficial for their businesses? And kind of talk about that, because this is probably one of the first episodes I'm doing on podcasting, which I get so many people to ask me questions about it. So I'm glad I'm doing it.
Yeah, me too. Like it's, I remember starting 8.5 years ago, right? And back then I would tell people I had a podcast and they would go, "What's a podcast?"
Yes.
And now they roll their eyes and go, "Oh, you have one too," right? I'm like, "No, I've been doing it a long time. I do well." It's evolved so much. So wherever you want to go with the conversation, I'm open.
Yeah. Okay. So before we jump in here, tell me a little bit about your background and what inspired you to start the Growth Now Movement podcast. So kind of tell us what inspired that.
Sure. So I'll try and truncate the story, right? Because with everybody, there's a journey. There's always, one thing leads to another, and somehow you find yourself in a position that you didn't realize you'd be in, right? And so I always go back to high school, and I always jokingly say, if there was a senior superlative for least likely to succeed, it would have been me. I had a 1.7 GPA. My mom was in the middle of a 20-year battle with opioids, and my dad was in jail.
Wow.
And when you look at that, like all signs pointing to you've got no shot, kid. Like, as a matter of fact, they say if your parent's an addict, 50% chance of being an addict. If your parent's in jail, 50% chance of ending up in jail. Like, do the math. I'm 100% screwed, right?
Yeah.
And basically. So, I started off on not the best foot, but when I was 19, I got into direct sales because obviously college was not the route for me. Ended up doing really well within that organization and learned a lot of skills as far as sales and management and all these other things. But the important piece was my mentor within the organization actually handed me a book called Who Moved My Cheese. And this book changed my life. And if you haven't read it, it's a super quick read. And essentially the premise behind the book is like change will happen around you. That part doesn't matter. What matters is how you react to that change. And it really spoke to me at the core, right? Like understanding that I had no control over the choices my parents made. I had no control over the choices of other people. All I had control over was how would I react to that. And that really began my journey of a desire to create my own schedule, to create my own life, to start my own businesses and do all these things. Now, when you're 19 and you have no idea what you're doing, like you're going to have a couple failures along the way. I had 3 failed businesses, all while climbing corporate ladders in medical sales and medical sales management and all these things, but still had that desire of time freedom and life freedom and really making an impact in the world. And so at the age of 30, which I will be 40 as of next week.
Milestones.
It's crazy. At the age of 30, I decided, okay, well, clearly I'm doing everything wrong. Let me try and figure out how to do this better. And really began the planning process of starting a podcast where I interview entrepreneurs and figure out how they did it so I can kind of use it as my own lessons, right? Like learn from the greats in order to implement that into my life. And what ended up happening was 6 months before I launched the show, my mom lost her battle to opioids. And that completely changed my approach to life in general. And the conversations obviously took a life of their own. We started talking about self-love, coming back from rock bottom moments. We weren't necessarily talking about business, although that was always kind of tied in. We were talking about life. And from there, the show ended up, really growing organically after a couple years. And Inc. magazine listed as the top 8 podcasts every entrepreneur should follow. And thus began the journey of entrepreneurship and speaking on stages and, running masterminds and live events and, owning a couple of businesses in the podcast space. But at the end of the day, it really started in that rock bottom moment of my mom passing away and then finding my voice in order to make an impact in the world. Yeah, I do believe that there's always like a turning point for people. And, you know, when you look at the
something that happens that kind of either jolts you into a better direction, to really find a way to change your life. Because that's what it's about. It's about what you believe. And it's so funny, I'm doing the 75 hard challenge right now.
I did that a couple years ago. I gained all the weight back, but I lost like 30 pounds in 75 days.
Listen, and it's so challenging. And so not only am I challenging myself physically, but I'm also challenging myself mentally to get into a different mindset, right? To look at life differently, to believe more in myself, to believe more in what I'm doing, and to pursue that. And so that's why I was happy to come and talk to you, because I know you talk about limiting beliefs and things of that nature, and to see your journey. And I think what entrepreneurs need to hear, that, like you said, I tried a few things and they failed, but I still kept going. And I think it's that piece of that I don't know, that tenacity to keep going is where I think a lot of entrepreneurs get stuck. So how did you 100%. Get that goal to just kind of, those failed, but I still kept going? I didn't give up. I didn't just settle and say, you know what, I'm going to leave this entrepreneurship alone. I'm just going to go ahead and do this corporate ladder thing and let that be my lifestyle, because I'm not doing this well. So how did you get that tenacity to just keep going?
Yeah, to be honest, it was chasing happiness. And I didn't find the happiness where I thought, right? Like I often, especially as men in this country and in the world in general, they tell you, go get the money, go get the house, go get the girl, then you can be happy, right? Work your butt off, and then you can find happiness. And well, the reality is my resilience through all of it was to, build something that I was proud of so I could be proud of myself. And the reality was I just didn't love myself in the process. And as I went through the podcast and started to build and everything started to grow, I realized I started getting these accolades. My businesses grew. People wanted me to speak on their stages, all these things I dreamed of. And I remember waking up one day and going, I still hate myself. And I think for me, like, that was the tenacity and the driver to get me to a certain place. But then the work really began, and the internal work. And, a lot of the things I talk about now from stages of overcoming limiting beliefs and the 5 people you need in your life, that all happened in the latter part of my growth journey, right? The business stuff happened first, but that was the tenacity. I was chasing happiness. I was trying to figure out that little piece that was missing in my life. Why wasn't I fulfilled? Why was I getting in relationships and blowing them up purposefully? Why was I doing all these things, these self-destructing patterns? I thought it would be solved with external wins. And so I constantly chased them. I also had an innate voice inside of me that I felt like I wanted to make an impact. The first business I ever started was actually an event business where we put together seminars and expos for entrepreneurs and business owners and stuff like that, which is funny that, full circle 10 years later, I'm doing that again as part of my business. But that's where I started. And so I always had this driver of wanting to help people and help them get to where they were going. But the end of the day, the real driver was, I just was trying to find happiness. And I know that's kind of a sad piece, but that's the reality. And then I was able to really figure it out.
Yeah. But I think that's how we all feel. We all try to figure out what that happiness is versus looking inward, So when you were on this rise with your podcast, like you said, you've been featured in Inc. magazine, Thrive Global also chose you as an icon. How did the accolades help with your confidence during that time as well? And I'm saying the confidence in terms of like your confidence in saying that, this business is really where I'm rooted at. I can do this and I'm going to continue going forward. How did that help with confidence?
Yeah, I'll be honest. When that was happening, I was in that phase of not loving myself. And so it didn't help me at all. It made me feel, I hate the term imposter syndrome because everybody talks about it, but it made me feel like I was an imposter. Like, who was I to, all these outside people going, wow, like, you're doing great things. And I, ended up on these lists and all these crazy things. But on the inside, I was like, no, I'm just some dude trying to figure it out like everybody else. And so it kind of created that imposter piece. Now I look back now after finding happiness and fulfillment in my life, and I'm really proud of those things, because the reality is everything I built was built on my purpose to help people realize that it doesn't matter where you come from. What matters are the choices you make today to create a better tomorrow for yourself. And so I got those accolades off the back of my purpose of helping other people. So it's never about me. It's about everybody who's hit play on the podcast. It's about anybody who's bought a ticket to my live events. It's about any of those people. And so now I find pride in the idea that these things happen so I can have a larger reach, because it truly helped me grow my audience in so many ways. Yeah.
So would you say that your advice would be to maybe to entrepreneurs to say, hey, lead with service versus thinking about yourself, lead with an act of service of helping others, and then you see growth in your business?
That's the only way. Everything I've built in my business, the podcast, all started with a question. And I end every conversation the same way, and I always have. And the question is, let me know how I can help you. Let me know how I can serve you. Let me know how I can help you with this thing you're doing. And I truly mean it. And I don't ever expect anything in return. People ask me all the time, like, how do you become friends with these people that you interviewed? And I've interviewed, celebrities and massive entrepreneurs and all these things. And people often go like, how do you become friends with them? How do you get them to speak at your event? And I go, honestly, because I don't expect that from them. There's no expectations when I meet somebody other than, hey, I think I may be able to help this individual in some way, shape, or form. Even if it's just a shoulder to cry on, I can help them. And everything I've done is built off of how can I serve you? Because the reality is a lot of podcasters go, hey, how can I grow my audience? Or a lot of businesses go, how can I grow my business? I go, well, ask your audience. Yeah. How can you serve them at a deeper level, right? The number one way to grow a business and a podcast is word of mouth. You can talk funnels and Facebook ads and all these things, which, by the way, are still important for so many businesses and necessary for so many businesses. But the reality is word of mouth is still the strongest way to grow any of that stuff. And the only way to do that is to serve, right? To serve, over deliver, give more. I can tell you I've hired many people to do certain things for me, and the ones who fall short time and time again are the ones I no longer work with. The ones who go over and above and beyond are the ones that I will ride and die with till the day I die. And so I think starting with an act of service is the catalyst for growth in anything that you do, personally and professionally.
Yeah, I believe that too. Let me ask you this. Out of everyone you had on your podcast, people that you've interviewed, who do you believe made the most impact on your business?
On my business?
Like on your podcast, or maybe even could be in your life to help you kind of push through some hard times and, achieve your greatness.
Yeah, there's a guy named Fabio Viviani who I often talk about. Now, he's been on my show twice now. If you don't know who he is, he was in the show Top Chef. He's been on, Beat Bobby Flay. So he's one of the top chefs in the world. He owns restaurants all over the world. His businesses do multiple hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Very, very successful person. And the crazy thing about me interviewing him, rewind, I was going to an event years ago. And he was one of the speakers. And now I'm not a reality TV show guy, which is hilarious because I'm now friends with a number of reality TV people. But I was like, I don't know who this guy is. And I remember saying to my friend, I go, who cares about a chef? Why are we going to this event to see a chef? Now, there were other speakers too, but he was one of them. And I remember he spoke at the event. And right afterwards, I turned to my friend and I go, I need to be friends with that guy. A year and a half later, he ended up on my podcast. And now he's one of my dear friends who has spoken at my event in 2019. He's somebody who supports me wholeheartedly. And two things that he did, right? Number one is he believed me before the world believed me. He came on the podcast, was blown away by who I was before Inc. magazine. And he ended up introducing me to 50 individual people to have on my podcast. So you're talking about people from Impractical Jokers to a comedian named Zane Lamprey to reality stars to Andy Frisella, who's the guy who started 75 Hard. He was on my podcast because of Fabio. And so I would say that he was a catalyst for me. Now, he hates when I say this. Like, he hates when I'm like, oh, yeah, because of him, I'm still doing what I'm doing. He's like, dude, I just made a couple introductions. But he has that mindset of like, I just want to give and I have no expectations. That's just who he is. And it's who I strive to be at that level. Like, he does it at a crazy level. And so I strive every day to do more of that because of who he is. And I think that he was a blessing at the right time. I'm grateful for his friendship.
Yeah. Let me just say, do you sit back and say to yourself, wow, I've never seen my podcast going as far as it did? Or did you always believe and see yourself getting to the level that you're at now? Because I do believe manifestation, visualization, is a part of the process of entrepreneurship. Like, you have to see yourself there before you even get there. Did you see yourself there? And, are you just astonished about where you are today?
I had no clue. I had absolutely no clue. Now, I'm a huge believer in visualization. It's one of my 4 daily non-negotiables that I do. I'm a really big believer in it. But I had no clue. Like, when I started a podcast, I mentioned earlier, like, people would be like, what's a podcast? Like, there was no like path of where this could end up. Like I honestly started, I go, it'd be cool to interview really cool people and potentially get some opportunities and maybe speak on a stage or two. I didn't think I'd be doing, what I'm doing now, where I get to speak all over the country and have my own events. And, I've interviewed, I mean, there's still a lot of people on my list that I want to interview that I haven't, but I've interviewed a ton that were on the list that I was like, okay, check them off. But I really had no clue. And I think, the catalyst for me, and I've talked about this before, not on this show, but on many other shows, but when I first started out, for the first year, nobody was listening. And I didn't understand that that's most podcasts. That I think it's like 78% of shows do less than 100 downloads an episode or something like that, or 80%. And I was there, right? I was doing 40 downloads, 50 downloads. Now we had some big names early on the show, which those episodes would spike. But then it would go right back down. And I remember around episode 48, so 48 weeks in, I did say to myself, I'll commit to 52 episodes. I'll do a year and see what happens. And so I was around episode 46, 47, 48. And I remember going, what am I doing? Like I've never heard from anybody who listens to the show. I don't even know if these downloads are real. Like what's going on? And I was like, maybe I'll just shut it down after the 52 episodes. And then what happened was somebody from Japan reached out to me and said, because of your show, I decided not to take my life. Wow. And it was in that moment that I realized I'm going to show up no matter what. I'm going to show up, as often as I can. I have a weekly show. During the summertime, we back off a little bit, but it's a weekly show. And because of that person, I kept showing up. And then it was, closer to the 2-year mark that I started to get Inc. magazine and all these other things. And so if it weren't for that one person, I don't know where I would have been. Right. But the only reason I am where I am now has been the consistency of 500. I think I'm at 530 episodes now.
Wow.
And so it's one of those things where I'm like, okay, like we talked about this earlier, right? Consistency is key, like to everything. And so it's just showing up, even if it seems like nobody is listening, just keep showing up. And, the flip side of that is I think sometimes to any podcasters listening who are like, yeah, I'm doing less than 100 downloads or I'm doing 100 downloads an episode, whatever. If you were a public speaker and you had a room full of 100 people every single week to talk to, hell, if you had a room full of 50 people every single week to talk to, would you show up? Now, all of a sudden, the tables have turned, right? We're so caught up in this social media game of who's got 1 million followers and who's got this, that, and the other thing. The reality is like, just keep showing up and serving your audience and you'll find a larger audience over time.
Yeah, that was going to be one of the questions I was going to ask you, because I know for podcasters first starting out, like you said, nobody listens. And I've said that too. I say, listen, you got to get used to the fact that when you first start, nobody's going to be there. That saying, if you build it, they will come. They're not coming right away. It's going to take time. You know what I mean? It's going to be you, but you have to stay consistent. I think that's one of the things that a lot of podcasters fall short is the consistency piece, being able to commit to the schedule that they have. So how important, because you just mentioned, like we said, how important you think as a new podcaster to stay consistent and not get discouraged, because that's what happened to the majority of people. And that's why they don't continue on. I mean, I even felt that way when I first started. I'm like, okay, how many more of these episodes am I going to do? And then I say, and then I begin to challenge myself. You know what, Shawnee, just put 2 out now. Put 2 episodes out. One can be your own monologue type, and then the next one be interview type. Try to increase your episodes, but stick to your schedule. And I've been able to stick to that schedule, and I have seen my numbers increase by sticking to that schedule and being consistent and showing up no matter what.
Yeah, especially early on, consistency is key. I showed up every single Tuesday for years before I ever heard from anybody other than that one individual from Japan. And so like consistency is absolutely so key. And I always used to say, like, my driver between like, beyond going like, okay, I need something every Tuesday. My driver was, I was like, if somebody's going to the gym, one of these 100 people that's listening to my show, if they go to the gym and my episode's not there, they're going to find another show to listen to, and that show's probably better than mine, and they're not going to come back. So I need to make sure I'm constantly in their notifications of new episode drop. And that was massive. The second thing is to truly care. And so what I was doing for a very long time is anybody who followed me on Instagram, I'd send them a 15-second voice memo. Hey, Shawnee, thank you so much for the follow. I really appreciate it. It means the world to me. If there's anything I can do to ever add value to you, please let me know. And then people start going, oh my God, I can't believe you actually sent me a voice memo. But like, I didn't realize that you would even be doing that. Like, and all of a sudden I started to find my audience, and then they started to post about my show because they had a connection with me. And then all of a sudden they'd be like, hey, I really liked that episode this week. And they felt comfortable communicating with me. Because I can tell you this, I've been listening to a podcast for 9 years, and I've never once reached out to another podcaster and said, hey, I listened to your show. And so when I look at that from that standpoint, why would I expect somebody else to do that? And so that's why I make it a purpose of mine to reach out to these people who give me a follow, as long as it's not one of those dumb spam accounts on Instagram.
Yeah, I know.
And you go, hey, thank you so much. And you know who they are right away. But it's like, thank you so much for the follow. And it creates that relationship and that bond. And those are the people who sign up for your courses, come to your events, all those types of things. Those are the people that long-term will support you.
Yeah, that's true. Because I think one of the big things too in podcasting is identifying your audience. Because people think once they launch a podcast, and I really want your perspective on this. When most launch a podcast, some will tell you, some people try to talk to everybody, right? It's like, oh, I could talk to whoever loves sports. That's who I'm talking to. And then you have people tell you, listen, you can't talk to everybody. You need to bring it down and really hone in on who you're talking to. What is your belief around niching down versus not niching down?
Yeah, I say you, especially now, you have to 100% niche down.
Yeah.
You have to, I say to people all the time, I go, who are you talking to? Who is the one person you're talking to? Break it down. What is their name? What's their age? Are they married? Are they divorced? Are they male, female? What's their political affiliation? Do they have pets? Do they have kids? Break it down and decide exactly who you're talking to. And that's who you should be serving every single week. And that's the best way to niche down, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. My show is not niche down. So it sounds like I'm being a hypocrite by saying that. But the reality is I started 8.5 years ago when there was 1/10 the amount of podcasts. And I was able to kind of break through the noise being broad and me just being me. And then now I've built a personal brand large enough that people go, okay, well, I'll tune in for Justin. Because I say this, if you have a big guest on your show, your listeners may spike. But if they like you, they'll stick around, right? They may listen to an episode, but they'll stick around for the host. And so I always say, as a host, you should give as much value even during interviews as you possibly can. Sprinkle in solo episodes, I think, are super key. I didn't really hear from anybody until I started doing, and I've stopped doing this since, but I used to do a weekly moment of growth, 5 to 15 minutes of me just talking something I've learned, something, whatever.
Yeah.
And that's when I started to hear from my audience, because I remember some of my guests who I'd built relationships with be like, Justin, your audience is great. And I'd be like, what audience? Because nobody's reaching out to me. When I started to show that I'm more than just a good interviewer, people started to reach out because, hey, okay, Justin knows his stuff beyond just being, how to interview. So I think all those things are super important. But now you have to know exactly who you're talking to, exactly who you're serving, and how can you get guests that can literally serve on such a deep level to them that they're like, Shawnee, I need more of this. I need more of this. I need more of you. Let's keep doing that. And that's the key.
Yeah. And I noticed that I started a series where it's called Surviving the Job Loss because I got laid off last year. Right. And I just jumped right into full-time podcasting. But when I started that series, because I felt like I'm doing a lot of interviews, I'm interviewing people. But when I started doing the more personal episodes, I began to see my numbers spike a little bit more because I felt like, okay, I'm being very vulnerable and I'm being very open and honest about exactly what's happening in my life at this moment and trying to give people some motivation around it and just trying to tell people how we get through this, how we manage financially the hit that we take, and now going all in with the podcast and really seeking out different things. And I noticed that when I begun to do that, I saw the numbers spike. People started reaching out to me and it's like, oh my God, thank you so much for sharing. I've been going through this myself. And I was like, wow, I really need to break, because I think when I first started, I held things back. You know how it is, social media sometimes can be, I'm relentless,
Scary.
And judgmental. And so you don't want to really share much because you're like, I don't need people just talking about, why you ain't saved more and what happened. And I still got those questions, right? I did. I got those questions about, well, you should have saved more. You should have been a big spender, because people don't know. They just assuming certain things. But I felt really good doing it. And I said, you know what? I need to do more of these. I need to be a little bit more authentic and give people a little bit more of me versus me just interviewing people and them learning from someone else and how, grow their business and stuff like that. So I agree with that. When I started doing that, I started seeing more uptake in my downloads.
Without a doubt. And to speak to what you were talking about, I think it's really tough to talk to a place where you're coming with an open wound, right? When it's
Yeah.
brand new to you, when it's the pain you just went through, it's an open wound. And I always say, like, you should never teach from an open wound. You can talk from an open wound, but never teach from an open wound, because you just bleed all over everybody. But what happens over time when you work through those processes, wounds become scars, right? And scars are the toughest skin we have. So I always say that wounds are for you to learn. Scars are to teach other people, right? The things that we've been through become the lessons that we're able to stand on to teach others and continue to grow ourselves. And the reality is, wounds will always happen. And what I always say is, like, you know, you talked earlier a little bit about, you know, rock bottom moments, right? Everybody's got them. Well, the difference is, most people hit a rock bottom moment. They may bounce back a little bit. Then they hit another rock bottom moment, another rock bottom moment, another rock bottom moment. By the way, we all know these people. This was my mother. Like, there was no sense of like steadiness. I also did this at a younger age. And finally I went, okay, no more rock bottom moments. Hard times, yes. No more rock bottom moments. And all that means is I'm not going to allow my outside circumstances to dictate who I become. And so, again, going back off of we all go through shit. Once we're able to heal from it a little bit, that's when we can start teaching about it. And that's what you did, right? It's scary to do it at first. And then you can do it over time. By the way, I was also a big spender when I was an employee. I'm now the cheapest man alive. But with that being said, and it's so funny. Like, my wife's always like, well, why don't you buy that thing for yourself? She's like, you're fine. And I'm like, I know, but it's just weird, right? It's just weird. Because I was so used to being broke. I grew up broke. I watched my mom's car get repossessed, all these things. But I'll share this with you as a glimmer of hope for anybody listening who's going through a hard time. My last job I ever had, I got fired from as well. Now, I did well, but I also spent well. Because we're like, hey, every 2 weeks there's another check coming, so whatever.
You know,
all out. I was
six figures. You're doing well. You know,
that's it.
I was doing well.
I was a baller. I was a bachelor. I was like, whatever, like, enjoying my life. Got fired from my job. I already had the podcast. I started to build a business a little bit, but it wasn't enough, obviously, to cover my bills. And right before I got fired, I got asked to speak at an event in Orlando, Florida, and I live in Pennsylvania. And so I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do it. Right. I already put in my vacation, whatever, then got fired from my job. And I had two options: one, pay my rent, or two, go speak at this event. That was it, like that, because I was paying my own way. This is before I got paid to speak. And I was like, I don't know what to do. And I decided to go speak at the event. Be like, all right, let's see what happens. And so I went and spoke at this event. And the one night, a bunch of speakers went out for drinks. And I was talking to one of the other speakers, and there's Mike Kim. He's actually speaking at my event in April coming up. And we had a conversation. And there's a whole funny story. And I know I've been rambling. There's a whole funny story to it. No, we won't get into it. But essentially, the conversation that we had, he completely changed my mindset about making money. And I went home and made $22,000 in the next 3 weeks. And I never looked back because of that mindset shift. So I always say, when your back's against the wall, double down on yourself, right? When COVID hit, 70% of my income when COVID hit was gone overnight. Live events and speaking, gone overnight. And I was like, I need to figure out what I'm going to do. And I hired a coach for $20,000 when my income got cut by 70%. I very quickly, learning from this coach, replaced that income and was able to kind of grow from there. So I always say, like, when your back's up against the wall, a lot of times people get scared. They go back to their safety. They immediately just fall back into whatever is ever easy, or into some sort of addiction cycle. The best thing to do is double down on yourself and understand that, like, sometimes, you know, when that back is up against the wall, when you feel you're broke, spend the money on your personal development. Go to the event, hire the coach, join the mastermind. What's the thing that's going to make sure you don't end up where you are now, again, 6 months down the road, a year down the road? And that's what I've done it multiple times in my life, and it always pans out, because, you know, when your back's up against the wall, like, you need to take action. Like, there's no safety net, right? And so that's and that's what I say everybody should do. Like, you know, it's scary, yes, but that safety net will always kind of be, you could always go get another job. You could always go do those things. And so I say, go all in when you can. Yeah.
And I think that's kind of where I am now. And so that's why I'm like, that was such great advice. I really love that, because you're right. When you're back against the wall, you're afraid to spend that money. Because there's been time where I've been like, I don't know if I should I don't know because, I have things, I have family, we got bills, and it's like, I don't know if I should take this money and invest it in this. But then I'm like, I want to go all in. If I want to go all in, I have to go all in and I have to take that step. But it's risky and it's scary. What do you think were some of your biggest challenges, Justin, with growing your podcast? What were some of the biggest challenges you faced?
Yeah, I think number one, like right off the bat, it was finding my voice. I had a co-host for the first year of the podcast. And part of that was like you were saying, like, it's scary to go out there and be vulnerable. So I had a co-host, and my thought was like, well, if we fail, we fail. It's not only me, right? Like get the weight off my shoulders. So part of that was finding my voice and what works best for me. The second piece is being true to who I am through the process, right? I now get pitched 40 to 50 times a day for people to be on my podcast. And I refuse to just take anybody. Like, I want to stay true to who I am, which is like, I want genuine people on the show who have, done some really cool shit, who truly care. And so if I skip a week now, like obviously before, no, but if I skip a week now, I do it because I'm not just taking anybody on my show. I'm super picky. I've probably taken 5 pitches over the last 8.5 years, and they were big names. They were like Sean T from Beachbody. They were, people like that. And so for me, it's really the end of the day. It was number one, finding my voice. Number 2, being true to who I was. And number 3 was truly all the work needed to be consistent early on. I had a full-time job. I remember doing an interview one time at 2:30 in the morning with a guy who lived in Israel. Waking up the next day and, getting to work just so I can make sure there's an episode for next week. And so I would say those little things, I'm pretty grateful for Inc. magazine and all the other things that ended up happening. Like, that truly helped my growth. I think that Inc. magazine article got read by 360,000 people. And when I'm on that list, like Andy Frisella was on that list, Lewis Howes was on that list, and all of a sudden there's this random person that it put a lot of new eyeballs on me. So I'm grateful for that. And then the last piece, like the most difficult part, was finding out, like, okay, what's my financial vehicle, right? Like, the reality is, most podcasts doing less than 100 downloads an episode. That's going to get you, I think, $2.50 an episode for sponsorship, right? Like, that doesn't do much. That doesn't do much for you. Hell, if you're doing 10,000 downloads, it's not doing much for you either. And so it's like, what was my vehicle that I was standing on to create financial freedom for myself? And that evolved over time, right? That started with podcast coaching and production, then got into the speaking and the live events and the retreats and the masterminds. And then, full circle moment, I launched a company a couple years ago called Pod Brand, where we help podcasters get seen and heard by creating social media content for them. And so, like, I think that's the constant evolution of, like, where's my sweet spot? The fun fact about me is I don't like working a lot. I probably work 2 to 3 hours a day. My wife's always like, she's like, get a job. Like, I have a job and I do well. We're good. But I've designed that life. And so my newest obstacles are a little bit different, and I feel blessed to have them. It's like, okay, is this opportunity going to take too much time for me? Like, how can I build a business without doing much work? Right. Like last year I added 6 figures of income with adding about 3 hours of work a month. And so, like, it's different difficulties as you grow and evolve and try and create the life that you want for yourself. But there's always difficulties, that.
Always. And monetization is one of the hardest things to do with podcasting, because it's hard to identify, like you said, when you first start out. So tell me this, when you first starting your podcast, should you have monetization in mind? Should that be a piece of your strategy? Or would you say, you know what, kind of build your brand first and then think about monetization after that?
Well, it's funny. People hear the word monetization, they immediately think sponsorship, right? There's other ways to think about monetizing your podcast, right? And I'll tell you different ways that I've seen. Like, one, obviously, is sponsorship. That's the basic, straightforward one. I like to talk more partnership than sponsorship, because the CPM is terrible on sponsorship in the podcast world. Which, by the way, CPM is essentially like dollars per 1,000 downloads. But from there, like, well, what is your business you're building around your podcast? What's the brand you're building? How can you serve people? Can you get clients from your audience? Can you get clients from using a clip and posting it on social media that leads them to, a freebie that leads to a funnel that leads to the coaching whatever you're doing? That's another way to monetize the podcast. A third way is I know a lot of people who use it as a lead magnet. It sounds a little dirty, but you interview people that's your perfect client, right? So I'll give you an example. There's a woman who came to me. I can't say who it is because I signed an NDA, but she came to me and she goes, Justin, I know you've really figured out this podcast thing. She's like, I want to grow my audience. I go, great. Let's sit down and have a chat. I go, why do you want to grow your audience? She goes, well, I want to monetize the show. Okay, well, this is a woman who helped 6-figure entrepreneurs become 7-figure entrepreneurs. She, in her show, she was interviewing 7-figure entrepreneurs about how their journey went and how they got to 7 figures. Okay, great. I go, what you need to do is your show needs to be you need to be interviewing 6-figure entrepreneurs to talk about how they got there. So immediately her show went from 100 downloads an episode to 1,000 downloads an episode because there's a lot of people who want to get to 6 figures who think 7 figures is unreachable. Yeah. Right. So there's a lot more people in that place. So her audience grew from that standpoint. She then, in the first 2 months, made $50,000 locking in clients based off of people she interviewed, solely off of organic conversation. How she's like, yeah, I help 6-figure entrepreneurs like you get to 7 figures. I'd love to have a conversation with you and see maybe I can support you. She had enough people hire her in the first 2 months that more than paid for me, the amount of money that she paid me. And so sometimes utilizing it from that standpoint of understanding who's your expertise, who's your true audience, how do you grow the show, and kind of, again, switching your niche is super key. And I think those are probably the 3 main ways to monetize. I'm sure there's other ones. But I would say those are key. It takes time. Right. Yeah. That's the reality. It takes time. But if you're consistent enough, it'll all play out the way that it's supposed to.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think when you first start out, the key, first be consistent, before you think about monetization. It's just going to be hard. Not hard, but it can be somewhat difficult for you to stay consistent with pumping out that content, pumping out those shows and stuff like that. What inspired you to do the Growth Now Summit live? What inspired you to do that?
Yeah. So I told you I did live events in the past. We had that business for about a year, and then we ended up pumping a whole bunch of money into one event that totally failed. And I was like, I'm never doing this again. I'm never doing live events again. And when I launched the podcast, I realized how much me interviewing these people and having access to them changed my life. It changed my life. Like, I can't tell you who I was 8.5 years ago compared to who I am now. From a standpoint of pure happiness. I don't care about the finances. Yes, I make more money now. That part doesn't matter. Just pure happiness and fulfillment. The fact that I'm now happily married when every relationship I had before was absolute shit. Like, all these things are because of the podcast. And I said to myself, I was like, well, not everybody has the opportunity to accidentally fall on an Inc. magazine list and then get to interview some of the smartest people in the world. And I said to myself, well, how can I bring this experience to other people? And that was the original thought behind Growth Now. So it used to be called Growth Now Movement Live, but now it's the Growth Now Summit. And that was the original idea behind it. And I was like, let me give access to these people that I've built relationships with to other people. And so that's what I've done. And it's an event that's considered pretty affordable compared to other events that are like it. The speaker lineups are always unmatched. The access to the speakers is like no other. Like Fabio spoke at my event in 2019, and so did Albie Manzo from Real Housewives of New Jersey, and they were sitting in the audience when they weren't on the stage, just with the people. Like, it's a completely different energy, because that's what I've cultivated with the Growth Now movement. Is like, we are all one, right? Like, I'm just lucky enough that I'm maybe 1 or 2 steps ahead of you, but never did I create this podcast or these events or my mastermind for people to go, oh, I want to be like Justin. No. Yeah. I just want you to look at me and go, if he can do it, I can clearly do it. So let me take action to, for the future. And so the summit was based off of the idea of like, I've got this great opportunity that not everybody has. Let me give it to other people. And it's been my favorite labor of love. Live events are difficult. There's a lot of moving parts. There is a lot of risk involved. but I love it. I absolutely love it. It's the event that I would do if I break even on it every single year. I'll continue to do it. It's truly, truly, truly an amazing experience that I get to create for other people. Like I've always loved creating other experiences for people. I grew up a wrestling fan, like professional wrestling, WWE, and I'm now almost 40 and still a WWE fan. I was at WrestleMania this year. I've interviewed WWE Hall of Famers. And for me, I look at those shows now and I go, wow, what an experience they create for an audience. And how can I take that experience and microdose it into my events? And I call the event a day-long rock concert for entrepreneurs and forward thinkers. And that's truly how I approach it. Like I go to concerts and I go, oh my God, I love how they did that intro. I love how the lighting was. And how do I infuse that into this event so everybody feels like they're a part of it versus just, oh, I'm in the audience and they're on the stage, so they're better than me. Because that's not the case.
That's so awesome. I got to make sure I attend one of those, right? Because it seemed, just the way you explain it, it just sounds like it'll just be so transformational, to be in a room of people who are successful and hear what their thoughts and opinions, which is why I started the podcast anyway, to interview entrepreneurs like yourself to learn from, to be able to take some of what you guys talk about and apply it to my own life, my own business, and my own way of thinking. What are some of your, because I believe every successful person has habits, right? And routines that they do to kind of keep them going. What are some of your personal habits and routines do you follow to maintain just your own productivity and your own growth?
Yeah. So I have 4 daily non-negotiables that I found fill my cup. This is not the catalyst for everybody to go, if I do these 4 things, then all of a sudden it's going to be successful. I realize in our space, Shawnee, that, people give and give and give, right? You're creating this podcast and you're giving and you're giving and you're giving. And a lot of times we pour from an empty cup. And I did that for years.
Oh yeah.
And so when I interview people, there's actually 2 questions I ask every single person, but this one is a 2-part question. It's what's your definition of success? The second thing is what are 3 things you do every single day to ensure that success for yourself? And I realize this is the common pattern between people that are successful comedians and actors to people that are successful billion-dollar entrepreneurs. The 3 things they did every single day were to serve themselves, whether that's working out, meditating, learning something new every single day, doing something that fills their cup to make sure they're healthy and they're at 100%. Because if they're at 100%, they can serve at a greater level, right?
Yeah.
And so my 4 things are this. The first thing is I move my body every day in some way, shape, or form, whether that's taking a walk in the morning with my wife or lifting weights in the basement or whatever the case may be. That's one thing I do, is move my body every single day. Second thing is I learn something new every single day, because I realize I'm a big believer in what is not growing is dead. And as humans, us growing is learning more and being open to new ideas and new experiences. The third thing is, the third thing is I reach out to somebody I care about every single day and let them know I'm thinking about them. A simple, hey, just checking in on you. And what I realize, a lot of times people hear that one and they go, well, Justin, that doesn't serve you. I go, no, it serves me wholeheartedly, because I love being a person that can be there for others. And then I can tell you, because I do that practice, rarely is there a day that I don't get a text from somebody checking on me. And it's become a beautiful cycle. And then the 4th thing is I do a daily visualization practice. And this could be anywhere from 5 minutes to 30 minutes of me truly getting in a place of like, where do I want to be? Right. So right now, my current visualization process is my live event. How many people do I want there? What do I want it to feel like, sound like, smell like? What do I want the hugs to be like when people are in the room together? Right. And I literally tie this visualization into my 5 senses. So I transport myself there. And what I realized doing that, whether it's long-term visualization of like, hey, I'm an old man and who's surrounding me and all the things, to shorter ones, like my event coming up in April, it's like, okay, what do I want it to look, sound, and smell like? All the things. It makes the action that you have to take easier, because you already know the amazing feeling that's going to happen when that happens. So it makes it easier for me to, promote it and reach out to people and, get all the pieces together and the moving parts and the DJ for the after party and where's this happening? Where's this happening? And so for me, those are my 4 non-negotiables that I feel fill my cup. And I always say what's in my cup is for me and what overflows is for everybody else. So fill the shit out of your cup, right? Like continue to make sure you're happy, healthy, wealthy, all the things that are important in order to serve. Make sure you're all those things.
Wow. I love that. Fill everything in my cup is for me, whatever flows over is for everyone else. I love that. Because you're right. We do give so much and we don't even think about ourselves a lot. Cause I tend to do that, with being a wife and, and a mom and stuff like that. You just kind of give, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And that's kind of what inspired me.
Moms are the worst. Moms are the worst at filling their cup.
Yes.
Without a doubt, because you guys are the most selfless people in the world. Like my wife is incredible. And the key is like to fill your cup in order to be a better mom. Like that's the selflessness that needs to go away from people. I always say being selfish is the most selfless thing you can do. So you can serve at such a deep level.
Yeah, you're right. And I do have to take time to fill my own cup. I even had to, one of the reasons why I started the podcast, I had to find something that brought me joy, and I'm like, I know we all like, oh yeah, my kids, my husband. I'm like, yeah, that's great. But I needed to find something that's personally mine, that's going to fill me and give me joy. And that's kind of what started with the podcast too. I'm going to bring this to, and close, but I have two more questions. One is, what advice would you give someone just starting out in their podcasting or entrepreneur journey? What advice would you give them to keep them motivated on the road to stay consistent into success?
Yeah, I mean, I think tying the show to something that fulfills you in some way, shape, or form. Like if you're doing it to make money only, you will fail because you will die out just like everybody else. But if you tie it to something more enjoyable, if you enjoy having the conversations, if you're using it as a networking tool, because by the way, podcasting is the greatest networking tool on the face of the planet. You and I would not know each other if podcasting was not a thing. So enjoy those little moments of it. And I think too, to stay consistent and keep going year after year is serve that one person. I often still think, 8 years later of that person in Japan who reached out to me out of nowhere on my private Facebook page, like found me and reached out and said this to me. I often think about that person and I go, well, that's who I'm speaking to. That's who I'm serving at such a deep level every single week that I show up. And so from that standpoint, if you can figure out those three things, you'll be consistent. Enjoy the process because that's what it is. And don't worry about your numbers. Just don't worry about your download numbers. Just worry about the person you're having a conversation with and the one person that's listening. That's when you win.
Yeah. I like that advice. What's next for you? What's next for the Growth Now movement? What's next for you? If you have your own personal passion project, what can we expect next from you, Justin?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, Growth Now Summit Live coming back this year, or I should say next year, April. It was something I didn't know I was going to do, and now we're doing it. So that's next for me right off the horizon, slowly but surely working on a book. So that should be coming out. But for me, like I'm in a place in my life, at just about 40 years old, scary, just about 40 years old, where I am so happy and fulfilled with my life that I just want more of that, right? I just want more abundance. And the way that I get my abundance and my fulfillment is by serving others. And continuing to grow my audience from that standpoint, like just so I can serve them. That's where my focus always is. And the idea there is like, okay, what's the next modality in order to serve at a deep level, right? Bringing back the summit, writing the book. These are just new modalities in order to serve and connect with new people. And so that's my future. For how long? Probably forever. The vehicle may always look a little bit different, but that's where I want to be because I am truly, truly, truly so happy and fulfilled in my life right now.
That's so awesome, Justin. One more question, because I wanted to ask this before. Where do you see podcasting going? What do you think it's going to look like over the next few years?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like I didn't know it was ever going to be this big, right? And I think the pandemic fast forwarded podcasting as far as like who's involved. Like all the celebrities jumped in around 2021 because they saw one or two people doing like, oh, they got success. Let me do that, right? And they're utilizing it as a way to monetize their lives, which is fine. And so I never knew that was going to happen. But here's where I see it going. This is my wild speculation. Virtual reality becoming more and more of a thing. I can see podcasting becoming, by the way, somebody steal this idea and create this for the VR world. But as podcasters to sit down, you and the guest, and you both have these VR goggles on, right? And it looks like you're sitting in the same room together. Yeah. And then your audience can put that VR goggle on and they're in the room with you too. And they can have the opportunity to ask a question. And so now all of a sudden podcasts become a VR live event every single week for people to be like, oh, I want to be in the room. Cool. This is how I get to be in the room. Because when we listen to podcasts, right? Think about Rogan. you feel like you're in the room with the conversations they're having. You feel like you're just sitting down with your buddies having a conversation. Well, what if you can bring that to life through VR? So that's what I think is happening next. I think you'll see more like networks, like truly high-end networks. Like at some point, I believe you're going to have like the ABC, the CBS, the NBC networks of podcasting. You're seeing these bigger ones pop up now. You're going to start to see them monopolize and come together. That's the less exciting side of it, because what about the indie pods, right? You and I, who aren't the NBCs. But that's kind of where I see it going, and I think it'll be exciting. I've been fortunate enough that it's become more and more popular every single year for the last 8.5 years, and so hopefully that continues as well. Yeah,
it really is, because it's so crazy how every show that I watch, either on Hulu, HBO, has a podcast now.
Yeah, it's true.
Every show. That's one of them have a podcast. So the companion podcast.
To tell you how probably inaccurate my guesses are of where it's going, I used to record every single episode with video.
Yeah.
And most of the videos, the first couple hundred episodes that I did, are nowhere to be found. Because I said to myself, who would sit down and watch two people on two different screens just sitting side by side have a conversation? So you're talking about over 2 years of content, video content, that just doesn't exist anymore, because I just threw it in the trash can on my computer. Because I was like, who would do that, right? But nobody would guess the pandemic. Nobody would guess that everybody would be sitting at home and totally accepting this as a form of viewing, right?
Yes.
And then you also see a lot of people, and I still do mine on Zoom because I live in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. So it's hard to get people to come in for a studio. But you're going to see more and more people in studios because it just creates a more professional, you have the multi-camera action, stuff like that. So it's easier to create video content. But podcasting has become a video platform as much as it is an audio platform, which is wild. And I never saw that coming. So the predictions that I told you are probably BS, and who knows? We'll have to wait and see.
The VR one sounds really cool, though, I got to admit.
Right?
It does. I would do that. I would definitely be a part of that. I would sit in the room and be able to ask questions. That would be awesome. That would
be amazing.
All right, Justin, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. I know my audience is going to get so much out of this show as I did. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.
Yeah. All right, guys. I am Shawnee Sanders. This is the Girl Techno Podcast, and I will talk to you next time. Thank you for listening or watching the Girl Techno Podcast. We really hope that this episode gets you one step further in turning your passions into profits. If you like today's episode, please make sure you like, subscribe, and follow Girl Techno Podcast on all social channels. And also make sure you review the episode, as your reviews are so important to help us grow. Also, please leave us a comment, as we would love to know your thoughts and opinions on this episode, and also any other episodes that you might want to see from the Girl Techno Podcast. Until next time, we'll see you in the next episode.